Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A good topic? Let's do it. What are your creepiest horror stories that are actually true? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I discovered I had a stalker because my friend borrowed my car. I was living alone at 18 in my own apartment. I noticed one day while looking for a favorite pair of underwear that it seemed like I was missing a lot of my favorite panties. I searched high and low but just couldn't figure out where or why. But I honestly didn't think too hard on it, and that was my mistake. I had a consistent work schedule, but this week I had swapped days off with a coworker, and it so happened that my friend needed to borrow my car because they had car trouble the day before. My friend swung by pretty early in the morning to pick up the keys, and I went right back to bed. But not too long after I would have normally been at work, I woke up to a strange sound. It was my front door opening. I sat up and listened, not sure I was actually hearing what I thought I was, but sure enough, I heard someone walk right in. They immediately walked straight to my bedroom, and to both of our horror, we made eye contact as I nearly shit myself, and clearly, they almost did too. Immediately they ran out, and I stood there frozen in shock from seeing the guy who did my oil change a few months ago. A few months earlier, I had gone to a Jiffy Lube for an oil change, and the same man who helped me was the same guy who made his way into my apartment. Through lots of police investigating, I found out that he had been stalking out my apartment and learning my schedule. After I left for work, he would pick my lock, steal my underwear, and hang out in my apartment. He told the police that he just wanted to be closer to me before he made his move. When I was 12, I was walking home from school and a car full of men pulled up next to me. They asked for directions and then asked if I'd get in to guide them. I said no. I was turning down a street that had a back entrance to a recreational field, so I made a split-second decision to just run for that field. Sometimes the entrance is locked, and I think I was the luckiest person on earth that day because it wasn't. When I got to the center of the field, where it's completely open and opposite my house, I glanced behind me, and two of the men had chased me. They quickly turned around and ran back when they realized people were in the field with their dogs. I found a suicide victim as a child. He had shot himself while his wife was away. We drove by him, saw his legs, asked if he was okay, and got no answer. We called the cops, and they come and shine a flashlight on him, and the lower half of his face was just gone. But he was alive and looking me right in the eye. He died on the way to the hospital. When I was about 11, my dad started taking me duck hunting with him. One of the spots we would hunt was a small duck blind off the banks of a river. We go out one morning in our small boat, get to the blind, and inside, lying on the bench, is a naked girl. She is crying and freaking out. My dad calms her down, and we take her back to the boat ramp and call the police. My dad just told me she got lost, and we didn't talk much more about it. About 3 years ago, he finally tells me the full story. Apparently, she had an abusive boyfriend that took her fishing, tried to have S, and when she refused, things escalated. She thought he was going to kill her and dump her body in the river. She jumped overboard, swam to the bank, and somehow found her way to our duck blind, where she hid from him. Freaked me out seeing someone in a blind at 5 a.m., but I can't imagine being her and going through that. One summer when I was about 6, my mom and my grandma went up to the mountains to give something to my reclusive aunt. Well, on the way back, we got lost, so that it got dark. There was no GPS devices these days. We drove for hours and eventually got to a clearing with a line of perfect suburban houses facing each other, all white and uniform in a neat line. But this was carved out of deep woods, with the tree line maybe 5 feet from the back of the homes. No cars, no lights, no sign of life. Until we get to the end, where a giant white church sits in the middle facing the road. My mom tells my grandma to turn around now, and she keeps saying maybe they have directions. But my mom tells her to leave now, getting hysterical, saying this is wrong. Grandma turns around, and as we do, a bunch of people in white robes come out of the church with shotguns, and we hightail it out of there. Several hours later, we found a gas station and found our way out and asked about it. And they said there is a doomsday cult somewhere in the deep woods, and not much is known besides they aren't nice people, possibly still out there 20-odd years later. My grandmother told me that when she was a little girl, she once visited a friend to play with, and while they sat on the floor playing, she saw her friend's dad looking through a window and making a weird face toward them, a grimace with his tongue stretched out. She asked her friend what the hell was up with her dad. He just made a funny face, but her friend was dumbstruck and pointed out that there's no way her father looked through that window because it's the window to a built extension of their house. Her father would have had to walk through them to reach that room because the only door to it was beside them. They checked the room, and surely enough, her father wasn't inside. The next day, her friend's father hung himself in that room and was found hanging with his tongue out. When I was in high school, my friend and I would drive all over the area and loiter around. We went to this one spot where a Crybaby Bridge urban legend was supposed to be. It was when far down this long rural road, and there was seemingly no one else in sight. We get to the location, and the bridge had been out of use for a long time. It was overgrown and had no trespassing signs all over it. Adjacent to it was a big overgrown field. We were already giddy about the Crybaby Bridge thing, so stuff already felt spooky. I joked that nobody would ever think to look out back here. I also dared my friend to go out there and look around. Neither of us did. Weeks later, a news story comes across my algorithm on Facebook. The bodies of 2 murdered teenagers were discovered in that field. The murderers hid the bodies there just a week before we had gone to the bridge, meaning they were still laying out there when we were. Still makes me sick to my stomach how we were one dare away from a potentially very traumatizing experience. When I was 14 to 15, a classmate of mine tried to kill me. He broke into my house during one night with a kitchen knife, intending to stab me in my chest while I slept. Luckily, I was not home at the time, or else I would definitely not be here. Fast forward a couple of weeks, and he's released into the custody of his mother, basically on house arrest. He escapes house arrest and is AWOL for a couple of hours. It was a school day, and my school went into full lockdown, and I was placed in the office of the principal while school staff patrolled the hallways. He was found and again placed into custody. Shortly after that, he was again released from custody into the care of his mother. Less than 24 hours later, he had attacked a young girl he did not know and sliced her neck. She made a full recovery as far as I know. During the trial hearing, he was not convicted for trying to kill me, as I was not at home. Later, a more senior court picked the case back up. It was revealed that his mother had written a letter to the authorities explaining that he had been talking about trying to kill me again, and had said that it was a mistake that I was not at home during the first incident. He was then convicted for attempted murder. He has a very low IQ and many mental health issues, and he will remain in protective custody for the rest of his life. He wanted to kill me because he had delusions about me suing him for harassment and other issues, all of which never happened. I can't get a restraining order, and by law, DCFS was not allowed to tell me where he was located. I only found out myself a couple of years ago where he is kept. TL, DR. A classmate tried to kill me when I was a teenager, and a bunch of other things happened. President James Garfield's assassination. He was shot, but the horrific part was how the doctors tried to save him. With unclean hands, they cut him open to try and search for the bullet. The doctors did not believe in germs and therefore did not need to wash hands or sanitize tools. They couldn't find the bullet, so they cut him open even more and dug around to try and find the bullet. Alexander Graham Bell made a metal detector to try and find the bullet, but the doctor would allow him to do the right side of the body where they believed the bullet was. In actuality, the bullet was on the left side of the body. The mattress had metal springs, which threw off the accuracy of the metal detector. When President Garfield couldn't eat anymore due to an inability to keep food down, they gave him nutrition enemas. He was septic, riddled with abscesses, and putrid. He had fevers and hallucinations. He went from weighing 210 pounds to 130 pounds and surviving 79 days since the shooting. So not only was he dealing with all of that, but he was essentially being starved to death. Truly one of the most gruesome ways to die.
It is pretty crazy how sanitary practices in medicine weren't really even near the forefront up until very recently. Like in some cases, some of our grandparents or great-grandparents' lifetime. But I'm grateful for it. I'm not necessarily that type of like super-duper germaphobe clean freak. But I mean, if you're going to stick your hands inside of someone's body, you might want to wash the dirt from under your fingernails, right?
I remember I took my nephew longboarding one night out of boredom. He wasn't that good, so it was a slow go, but ultimately really relaxing and fun. We got to a hill that we had to walk up, and just as we crested the top, we saw a raccoon that had been hit by a car. The top half looked totally normal, and then the back half was flat as a pancake. It was pretty gross, but we kept moving on, and then as we passed it, the raccoon lifted its head and looked at us. It was mortifying, and I didn't quite know what we should do. I thought about hitting it over the head as my nephew asked what we should do. I couldn't bring myself to do it and told him, let's just keep going. I feel bad for the raccoon and my nephew. It was effed up. About 4 years ago at around 3 a.m., my younger sister and I were hauling some old stuff up to our bulk trash pile. We like to be helpful with the chores, and we were bored anyway. Being outside at night never bothered us. We lived in a cul-de-sac way far off in a neighborhood with a huge yard and a trampoline off on the side yard. Lots of woods. Our outside light had gotten fixed too, so we had extra light. We hauled it all the way up there and threw it in the pile. When we turned around to head back in through the side door, I saw a figure on the trampoline, sitting completely upright. It looked as if it were sitting cross-legged with a straight back. Its shape was human, but it didn't have any discernible features from that far away. It looked like it was covered in a thin tan sheet. When I paused, she kept talking and walking. I reached out for her and she froze, looked at me, then in the direction I was looking in. We always had a code word, a no around, this is serious code word. When she said it, we both booked it for the front door instead. No one believed us. She was in hysterics and I was just shocked. It was hard to sleep that night. I still have no idea what it was. No way it was an animal. It had shoulders and a head. My friend and I got up early one Sunday morning for work. We had been out for a drink with our wives on that Saturday night, so they stayed over. The house was old, and we had all previously had creepy experiences there, but this was something else. We were at the opposite end of the room when we both felt and heard a buzzing like static electricity. The room elongated, and we both had tunnel vision. I was looking straight at his face and could only see his eyes. This lasted for about 10 seconds, and then reality snapped back. The room was ordinary, and the static and tunnel vision were gone. I've never left a house as quickly. I worked the night shift at a county jail back in 2018 to 2020. It was my first job, so I've had creepy experiences, both real and maybe imagined. There were certain parts of this jail that gave me the creeps, like the filing cabinet building, the dungeon, that used to be the old jail. You always felt like you were being closely watched and followed around in that area. A couple of coworkers and an inmate told me separately that an inmate hung himself because he was sentenced to life in prison for murder and he didn't want to go. He hung himself in the old part of the jail. Every once in a while, we would get the intercom pinging in random cells that we knew no inmates were housed. There was one time I answered the detox cell, and we just heard someone take a deep breath in on their side. My coworker went up to check out the cell to be sure no one was there. A couple of months later, I went to gather some blankets and hygiene products so we could be prepared. As I walked back to the control room where my coworker was, I saw an inmate in orange hunched over in the visitation room. That room is like a small utility closet with windows, so inmates could talk to visitors. It was 8 p.m., so an hour into my shift, and I immediately thought there was no way we missed someone waiting here for us to relocate him. I stopped and walked backwards to peer into the window, and no one was there. The door was even locked, so I unlocked it to look around. Nothing. He didn't look like an apparition. I wasn't hallucinating. I was wide awake. I felt like I saw a real person there. A trustee who was in the laundry room where their television were said, "You saw him too, didn't you?" I asked him about it, and he gave me the accurate description of him. Bald, skinny, tall. "Yeah, we see him back here every once in a while, always at night. Don't know who he is or was." A couple of weeks later, I was sitting in the control room. It was around 2 a.m. All the inmates were sleeping. My coworker went back to the trustee pod to chat with them. I got up to grab my water bottle in the adjacent office, and as I walked past the window, I saw the tall, thin, bald young man standing in the booking area via my peripheral. When I looked back, he wasn't there anymore. My coworker came around the corner and went out to check the holding area, but before, no one was in there, and there was nowhere for someone to slip out either. This was all creepy and true, but unexplainable to this day. I've searched up the suicide and never found anything on that, nor anything about who that man was. Maybe it was swept under the rug. I don't even know if the tall man was even the man who allegedly took his own life. When I was in my first year of high school long ago, my locker was next to the locker of a beautiful senior student. She had long dark hair to her waist and big brown eyes. I was absolutely smitten. She had a good-looking boyfriend who often met her at her locker. Every day I just hoped to get a glimpse of her. A couple of times she gave me a smile and a hello, which would put me on cloud nine for about a week. A few months into the term, she was murdered. A young man with psychiatric issues stalked her without her knowledge. One day he hid in the back seat of her car and waited for school to get out. No one locked cars back then. At gunpoint, he forced her to drive out into the plains where he arred and murdered her. For some reason, her name popped into my head out of nowhere a few days ago. A quick Google of her name pulled up all the local newspaper stories from the event. I worked, no longer, this was a few years ago now, at a hole-in-the-wall bar in southwest Florida as my first job. You could serve alcohol at 18 for those raising brows. I've met a lot of normal people, but a few scarier individuals that left me uneasy. One of those people is someone I only met once but still vividly remember because he had facial and neck tattoos and was charming on a surface level. His vibe was off though. He had asked me and a few other girls I was working with if we wanted to hang out once the bar closed. I declined reluctantly. He seemed irritated but let it go. My other coworkers also declined. This same person murdered 2 women a very short time later. A fellow bartender at a different bar 5 minutes up the road, and a woman he'd met at the bar in a different city over the river, 15-minute drive. The other bartender he killed in cold blood, luring her to his car only to strangle her, shove her out, repeatedly run her over, and dump her in a field right by the bar. He's been given the death penalty as of this year, and I still think about the fact that it could have been me if I hadn't listened to my gut. I was a huge people pleaser and hated disappointing others. I really easily gave in to the pressure at that young age. This is the only one that really sits at the forefront of my memory.